Sometimes a man loses so much that he forgets what it feels like to hope. Wade Harlan has been that man for 20 long years, living alone in the Montana mountains with nothing but memories that won't let him sleep. Tonight, with his last dollar in hand and nowhere left to turn, he walks into Cedar Ridge looking for any kind of shelter from the coming storm. At Murphy's General Store, they're holding a charity auction for abandoned storage units. Wade bids on one unit, just a rusty metal box that belonged to some rich railroad man who disappeared years ago. He's hoping for maybe some old tools he can sell. But when that door rolls open, everything changes. Inside is a fortune beyond his wildest dreams and secrets that will shake this sleepy town to its core. The question is, what happens when a man who's lost everything suddenly owns it all? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind carries the scent of rain and regret as Wade Harlan shuffles down Main Street, his worn boots leaving uneven prints in the dusty earth. 20 years ago, he walked these same streets with purpose and pride, his back straight and his heart full. Back then, folks knew him as the best ranch foreman in 3 counties, a man who could gentle the wildest horse and fix any problem with steady hands and patient wisdom. Back then, he had Sarah. He pulls his threadbare coat tighter against the evening chill and tries not to look at the empty lot where their little house once stood. The lot where Sarah died while he was 3 counties away, helping a neighbor with a difficult carving. By the time he'd ridden home, there was nothing left but ash and the smell of smoke that still haunts his dreams. The worn leather journal in his coat, pocket presses against his ribs, every page filled with letters he's written to her over the years. Conversations he wished he could have, apologies that echo in the mountain silence. Sometimes he reads them aloud to the stars, imagining her voice carrying back on the wind. Sometimes he just holds the journal and remembers the sound of her laugh. Murphy's General Store squats at the end of Main Street like an old hound on a porch, weathered but welcoming. Warm light spills from its windows, and Wade can see a crowd gathered in the back lot where they're setting up for the charity auction. The same auction where desperate folks bid on other folks' forgotten belongings, hoping to find something worth more than what they paid. Well, I'll be damned, comes a gravelly voice from the store's front porch. Wade Harlan, as I live and breathe. Wade turns to see Murphy himself, Thomas Murphy, a man who's run this store for 40 years and knows everyone's business whether they want him to or not. Murphy's got more grey in his beard now, and his belly's grown rounder, but his eyes are the same keen blue that never missed a thing. Evening, Murphy. Wade's voice sounds rusty from disuse. He's gotten out of the habit of talking to people who can talk back. Haven't seen you in town for, what's it been, 3 years? 4? Murphy rocks back on his heels, studying Wade with the careful attention of a man assessing livestock. You look like hell, friend. Feel about the same. Wade manages something that might be called a smile. Heard you got an auction tonight. That we do. Raising money for the widow Henderson. Her husband got crushed in that mine accident last month. Left her with 3 young ones and bills stacked higher than hay. Murphy's expression grows serious. Times are hard all over, Wade. Railroad's talking about closing the depot, which would pretty much kill what's left of this town. Wade nods, though he's been too long in the mountains to care much about the town's troubles. His own troubles fill up all the space he's got. You thinking about bidding on something? Murphy asks. Most of it's just old furniture and boxes of clothes, though there is one unit that's got folks curious. Before Wade can answer, a woman's voice cuts through the evening air. Thomas Murphy, you stop gossiping and help me with these tables. The voice belongs to Elena Martinez, the town's doctor and the closest thing Cedar Ridge has to royalty. She's in her 60s now, her black hair streaked with silver, but she still moves with the authority of someone who's delivered half the babies in the county and buried their grandparents. Yes, Doc, Murphy calls back, but he winks at Wade. Elena runs this auction every year, got a heart bigger than the state of Montana and twice as fierce. Wade watches Dr. Martinez direct the setup with military precision, and his chest tightens with an old familiar pain. Sarah had moved like that, purposeful, graceful, completely sure of her place in the world. Sarah had wanted to be a teacher, had talked about how they'd raise a family in Cedar Ridge, how their children would grow up knowing everyone in town and being known in return. "You all right, Wade?" Murphy's voice has gone gentle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just remembering," Wade says quietly. "This town holds a lot of memories. Good ones, I hope." Wade doesn't answer. Good and bad are all mixed up together like water and whiskey. The good memories hurt worse than the bad ones because they remind him of what he lost. A younger woman emerges from the store carrying a folding chair. Dr. Martinez's daughter, Rebecca, though Wade remembers her as a gap-toothed kid who used to help her mother with house calls. Now she's grown into a striking woman with her mother's strong features and intelligent dark eyes. She must be 30 now, Wade calculates, probably the schoolteacher her mother always said she'd become. Rebecca catches sight of Wade and pauses, recognition dawning on her face. "Mr. Harlan, is that really you?" "Hello, Rebecca." Wade tugs at his hat brim, suddenly conscious of how he must look, wild-haired and thin, more like a scarecrow than a man. "I'm so sorry about Sarah," she says softly. "I know it's been many years, but I still think about her sometimes. She used to help me with my reading when I was little. The kindness in her voice nearly undoes him." Wade clears his throat and nods his thanks, not trusting himself to speak. "Rebecca teaches at the school now," Murphy adds, apparently sensing the need to fill the silence. "Got herself a fine education back east, then came home to help her people. Good head for books and numbers, that one. The auction's starting soon," Rebecca says gently. "Are you staying for it, Mr. Harlan?" Wade pats his coat pocket where his last silver dollar rests, the final remnant of everything he once owned. "Thinking about it. Heard there might be something worth bidding on. Unit 17, Murphy says with a knowing nod. Belonged to old Cornelius Blackwood, you remember him? That railroad fellow who built the big house up on Prospect Hill, then disappeared about 15 years back." Wade does remember vaguely. Blackwood had been a legend more than a man, a mysterious tycoon who'd arrived in Cedar Ridge with more money than sense, built a mansion that dominated the hillside, then vanished one winter night without explanation. The mansion had stood empty ever since, slowly surrendering to weather and time. They found his storage unit when they were cleaning out the old warehouse district. Murphy continues. "Been sitting there all these years, rent paid up through some lawyer back east, but the lawyer died, and his firm don't want to mess with it anymore, so they're donating it to charity. What's supposed to be in it?" Wade asks. Murphy shrugs. "Nobody knows. Could be furniture, could be junk, could be treasure. That's the gamble, ain't it?" Sheriff Coleman appears around the corner of the building, his badge glinting in the lamplight. He's a good man, Wade remembers, fair and decent, not given to throwing his weight around. Coleman nods to Wade, with the careful neutrality of a lawman who knows better than to pry into a man's private grief. "Evening. Wade, good to see you back in town, Sheriff. You staying at the inn tonight? Storm's coming in, and those mountain roads get treacherous in the rain." Wade hadn't planned on staying anywhere. He'd figured to spend what little money he had on something useful, then head back to his cave before the weather turned. But the thought of climbing those dark trails in a downpour makes his bones ache. "Might do that," he admits. Dr. Martinez calls out that the auction is starting, and the crowd begins to gather in a loose semicircle around the makeshift stage. Wade finds himself swept along with the others, Murphy chattering beside him about who's likely to bid on what and why. The auctioneer is a thin man with a booming voice who gets the crowd warmed up with a few small lots. Boxes of kitchen goods, a rocking chair with one broken runner, a trunk full of old quilts that brings a spirited bidding war between two elderly ladies. Wade watches it all with the detached interest of a man observing life from a great distance. Then they bring out the information sheet for Unit 17. "Now here's something special. Folks," the auctioneer announces. "Storage unit belonging to the late Cornelius Blackwood, contents unknown. Minimum bid is $5, but remember, this is for charity, so let's see some generosity tonight. A murmur runs through the crowd. Wade can see the curiosity on their faces, the hope that maybe, just maybe, old Blackwood left behind something valuable. He thinks about his own silver dollar, heavy in his pocket, and wonders what Sarah would say about gambling their last bit of hope on a stranger's forgotten belongings. But as he stands there in the lamplight, surrounded by the gentle murmur of voices and the familiar rhythms of small-town life, Wade feels something he hasn't felt in 20 years. Not hope exactly, but the memory of hope. The echo of what it used to feel like to believe that tomorrow might be different from today. He reaches into his pocket and closes his fingers around that last silver dollar. Sarah always said that fortune favors the bold, though she'd never had much use for gambling. But maybe, just maybe, this isn't gambling at all. Maybe it's faith. The bidding is about to begin, and Wade Harlan is about to take the first step back into a world he's been hiding from for 2 decades. The question that haunts him isn't whether he can afford to bid on that storage unit. The question is whether he can afford not to. Do I hear $5 for Unit 17? The auctioneer calls out, his voice cutting through the evening air like a bell. Wade's hand moves to his pocket, fingers wrapping around the silver dollar that represents everything he has left in this world. Around him, the crowd shifts and murmurs, folks craning their necks to get a better look at the brass auction paddle numbered 47 that trembles slightly in his weathered grip. $5, comes a voice from the back. Wade turns to see Harrison Webb, the banker, raising his paddle with the casual confidence of a man who's never known real want. Webb's got soft hands and a softer belly, the kind of prosperity that comes from other people's desperation. I have 5, do I hear 10? Wade studies the faces around him. Most folks here are struggling just like him. Maybe not living in a mountain cave, but working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and the bank from taking their homes. Webb doesn't need whatever's in that storage unit. He's just betting that poor old Blackwood left behind something worth more than the price of admission. $10, Wade hears himself say, surprising everyone, including himself. Webb's head snaps around, his pale eyes narrowing as he takes in Wade's ragged appearance. There's a calculation there, cold as January wind. Webb's thinking this mountain hermit can't possibly have enough money to make this interesting. 15, Webb counters without hesitation. Wade's silver dollar suddenly feels impossibly heavy. $15 might as well be 1,500. He doesn't have it, never will have it, and Webb knows it. But something in the banker's smug expression lights a fire in Wade's chest that's been cold for 20 years. "Hold on there," Murphy calls out from beside the auctioneer. "Webb, you know the rules. This is a charity auction, cash only, and you got to show you have the money before you can bid." Webb reaches into his jacket and pulls out a roll of bills thick enough to choke a horse. "Satisfied, Murphy?" All eyes turn to Wade. He can feel the weight of their attention, their curiosity about what this ghost from the mountains could possibly have to offer. Rebecca Martinez gives him an encouraging nod from across the crowd, and Dr. Martinez watches with the careful attention of someone taking a patient's pulse. Wade reaches into his pocket and pulls out his last silver dollar. It catches the lamplight as he holds it up, and a hush falls over the crowd. Everyone here knows what it means, a man betting everything on nothing more than hope. "That's all I got," Wade says quietly. $1. The auctioneer looks uncertain. "Sir, the current bid is $15. "I know what the bid is." Wade's voice carries across the lot with surprising strength. "I'm saying I got $1, and if that's not enough to compete with a man who's got more money than sense, then maybe this whole thing ain't about charity after all." Sheriff Coleman steps forward, his hand resting easy on his gun belt. "Now, gentlemen, let's keep this civil." But Webb is already laughing, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "You hear that, folks? Mountain Man thinks he can outbid me with pocket change." He waves his roll of bills. $25. The crowd murmurs uneasily. $25 is real money in Cedar Ridge, enough to keep a family fed for a month. But there's something ugly in Webb's satisfaction, something that makes decent people uncomfortable. Wade looks down at his silver dollar, the last tangible connection to the life he'd shared with Sarah. She'd given it to him on their wedding day, a good luck piece her grandfather had carried through the war. For 20 years, he's carried it everywhere, a talisman against the complete emptiness that threatens to swallow him whole. "This dollar means more to me than all your bills mean to you," Wade says, his voice steady. "Sarah gave it to me, and I've carried it through 20 years of hell. If that's not worth $25 of charity spirit, then I reckon I don't understand what charity means anymore." Rebecca Martinez steps forward, her dark eyes flashing. "Mr. Webb, this is supposed to be about helping the Henderson family, not about you showing off." "Business is business, Miss Martinez," Webb replies coolly. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills." "Maybe not," comes a new voice from the edge of the crowd. "But decency ought to count for something. It's old Pete Kowalski, a retired miner whose gnarled hands shake with palsy, but whose voice still carries the authority of a man who's spent 40 years underground. I remember when Wade Harlan was the finest man in this county. Lost his wife in that fire, lost everything that mattered, and we all just stood by and watched him disappear into those mountains like a wounded animal." Pete steps closer to the makeshift stage, his cane tapping against the dirt. "Now he comes back, puts his heart on the table along with his last dollar, and we're gonna let some banker with more money than character shame him out of it?" A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. Webb's face reddens, but he keeps his voice level. "This is an auction, not a charity case." "It's both," Dr. Martinez says firmly. She reaches into her purse and pulls out a $5 bill. "I'm adding this to Mr. Harlan's bid. That makes it $6. I'll add 2 more, Murphy announces, digging into his own pocket. "5 from me," calls out Rebecca. Soon half the crowd is stepping forward, adding their own small contributions to Wade's bid. Not much from each person, $1 here, 50 cents there, but it adds up to something more than money. It adds up to a community deciding that some things matter more than the highest bidder. Wade stands frozen in the center of it all, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness from people he'd almost forgotten existed. His throat tightens as coins and crumpled bills pile up in Murphy's hat. Each contribution a small act of faith in a man who'd given up on faith entirely. When the counting is done, Murphy announces the total, $27.35. Webb's face has gone from red to purple. This is irregular. Auction rules clearly state that this is for charity, Sheriff Coleman interrupts smoothly. And I'd say the spirit of charity is being served just fine. The auctioneer looks around nervously, clearly unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. Finally, he shrugs. "Do I hear any other bids?" Webb looks around the crowd, reading the mood correctly. These are his neighbors, his customers, people whose goodwill he needs to maintain his business. Pushing further would cost him more than any storage unit could be worth. "Fine," he mutters, stuffing his money back into his jacket. "Have your junk. Going once," the auctioneer calls. "Going twice. Sold to Mr. Harlan and friends for $27.35. The crowd erupts in cheers and applause. Wade finds himself surrounded by well-wishers, people clapping him on the back and welcoming him home like he'd never left. It's overwhelming after so many years of solitude, but it's also warming something inside him that he'd thought was frozen beyond repair. Rebecca appears at his elbow, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Harlan. Shall we go see what you've won?" The storage unit sits at the far end of the warehouse district, a metal box no bigger than a horse stall with a roll-up door secured by an ancient padlock. Murphy produces a pair of bolt cutters, and with a sharp crack, the lock falls away. "Moment of truth," Sheriff Coleman says quietly. Wade grasps the handle of the roll-up door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind this thin sheet of metal lies either vindication or humiliation. Either his neighbor's faith in him was justified, or they've all just thrown good money after bad sentiment. He takes a deep breath, thinks of Sarah's silver dollar now resting in Murphy's hat, and pulls. The door rattles upward, revealing the shadowy contents of Cornelius Blackwood's forgotten storage unit. What Wade sees in that first moment of lamplight makes him stumble backward. His hand flying to his chest. Stacked floor to ceiling are wooden crates marked with shipping labels from places like New York and San Francisco. Expensive furniture covered in dust sheets. Filing cabinets that look heavy enough to contain the secrets of kings. And in the back, barely visible in the shadows, something that glints like gold in the flickering light. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," Murphy whispers. Wade stares into the unit, his mind reeling. This isn't just the random accumulation of a wealthy man's possessions. This is something else entirely. Organized, deliberate, hidden away like a treasure cache waiting for the right person to find it. Rebecca squeezes his arm gently. "I think your neighbor's faith was well placed, Mr. Harlan," but as Wade looks at the fortune spread out before him, all he can think about is the question that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Why did Cornelius Blackwood disappear, and what was he so desperate to hide? Wade returns to the storage unit the next morning with a crowbar borrowed from Murphy and a mind full of questions that won't let him sleep. The early sun slants through the warehouse district, casting long shadows between the abandoned buildings that once hummed with railroad activity. Now they stand like tombstones marking the death of Cedar Ridge's prosperity. The contents of Unit 17 look even more mysterious in daylight. What seemed like random wealth in last night's lamplight now reveals itself as something far more deliberate. Every crate is numbered and catalogued. Every piece of furniture is positioned with military precision. This isn't storage, it's a fortress of secrets. Wade pries open the first crate with shaking hands. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, are stacks of bearer bonds issued by banks in Chicago and New York. He's seen enough of these during his ranch days to know what they represent. Money that belongs to whoever holds the paper, no questions asked. There's enough here to buy half of Montana. The second crate contains gold coins, each one gleaming like captured sunlight. Wade picks up a $20 double eagle dated 1904 and feels its weight in his palm. He's held maybe 3 gold coins in his entire life, and here are hundreds of them, nested in velvet like sleeping birds. But it's the third crate that stops his heart. Inside are legal documents, deeds, contracts, land surveys, all bearing the name Cornelius Blackwood. As Wade sorts through them with trembling fingers, a picture emerges that defies everything he thought he knew about the mysterious railroad tycoon. Blackwood hadn't just owned a mansion in Cedar Ridge. He'd owned thousands of acres throughout Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. Mining claims, water rights, railroad easements. The man had assembled an empire built on paper and secured with gold. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan." Wade spins around to find Rebecca Martinez standing in the doorway, a basket in her hands and concern written across her face. She's traded yesterday's auction clothes for a simple blue dress and practical boots. "Looking every inch the school teacher she's become, Miss Martinez." Wade straightens up, suddenly conscious of how he must look after a sleepless night. "You're up early." "I brought coffee and breakfast," she says, holding up the basket. "Thought you might need sustenance for whatever this is." She gestures at the organized chaos around them. Wade accepts the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup like it's an anchor in a storm. "I don't rightly know what this is," he admits. "But it's bigger than I thought. Bigger than anything I ever imagined." Rebecca steps carefully around the open crates, her educated eye taking in the documents scattered across an old table. "These look like legal papers, may I?" Wade nods, and she begins sorting through the deeds with the methodical approach of someone who understands the language of law. Her father had taught her to read contracts when she was still in school, preparing her for a world where knowledge was the only real protection against those who would take advantage. "Mr. Harlan," she says after several minutes of silent reading, "do you understand what you're looking at here?" "Money," Wade says simply. "More money than I've ever seen in one place. Not just money, power." Rebecca holds up a deed that covers 3 pages of dense legal text. This single document gives ownership of the mineral rights to everything between here and the Wyoming border. The gold, the silver, the coal, all of it. Wade sets down his coffee cup with hands that aren't quite steady. "That can't be right." "It is right." And there's more. Rebecca picks up another document, this one bearing an official seal. Water rights to the Yellowstone River tributaries. Railroad easements that would allow someone to build a competing line to the Northern Pacific. Mr. Harlan, if these documents are legitimate, you don't just own some old furniture and gold coins. You own the foundation of an empire. The weight of her words settles on Wade like a landslide. Empire. The word tastes foreign in his mouth. Impossible for a man who spent 20 years living in a cave and eating whatever he could hunt or gather. There's got to be a mistake, he says. Men like me don't inherit empires. Maybe that's exactly why you did, Rebecca replies gently. Maybe Cornelius Blackwood was looking for someone who couldn't be bought or corrupted. Someone who'd lost so much that money couldn't tempt him into doing wrong. Before Wade can respond, they hear footsteps outside the storage unit. Sheriff Coleman appears in the doorway, his badge catching the morning light. Behind him lurks a stranger, a thin man in an expensive suit who looks as out of place in Cedar Ridge as a peacock in a chicken coop. "Morning, Wade, Miss Martinez," Coleman says with careful neutrality. "This here is Mr. James Morrison from the Mountain Pacific Railroad. Says he's got some questions about your acquisition." Morrison steps forward with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. His suit probably cost more than most folks in Cedar Ridge make in a year, and his smile has the cold precision of a banker foreclosing on a widow's farm. "Mr. Harlan, I presume." Morrison extends a manicured hand that Wade ignores. "I represent certain interests that may have had business dealings with the late Mr. Blackwood. We'd like to discuss purchasing any documents you might have found." Documents? Wade keeps his voice level, though every instinct tells him this man means trouble. "Oh, nothing important," Morrison says with practiced casualness. "Old contracts, expired agreements, that sort of thing. Purely historical interest, you understand. We'd be prepared to offer a generous price for anything that might have belonged to Mr. Blackwood's business affairs." Rebecca steps closer to Wade, and he can feel the tension radiating from her like heat from a forge. Her education has taught her to recognize the language of threats wrapped in politeness. "How generous?" Wade asks. Morrison's smile widens. "Shall we say $5,000 for whatever papers you might have found? No questions asked, no need to authenticate or appraise. Just a simple business transaction between gentlemen, $5,000. Wade tries to comprehend the number. It's more money than he's seen in 20 years. Enough to buy a decent spread and live comfortably for the rest of his life. Enough to never worry about shelter or food again. But something in Morrison's eagerness sets off alarms in Wade's head. A man doesn't offer $5,000 for worthless papers, and he doesn't send representatives from major railroad companies to buy historical curiosities from mountain hermits. "That's a mighty generous offer," Wade says slowly. "Mind if I ask why these old papers would be worth so much to you?" "Simply cleaning up loose ends," Morrison replies smoothly. "When a company's been in business as long as Mountain Pacific, there are always old files to organize, outdated contracts to dispose of properly." Sheriff Coleman shifts uncomfortably. "Mr. Morrison, this is all sounding a bit irregular. Maybe Mr. Harlan needs some time to think about your offer." Of course, Morrison agrees quickly. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Harlan, but I do hope you'll consider our offer carefully. Sometimes holding onto the wrong paperwork can lead to unnecessary complications. The threat hangs in the air, like smoke from a campfire." Morrison tips his hat to Rebecca, nods to the sheriff, and walks away with the measured stride of a man who's used to having his suggestions followed. "Wade," Coleman says quietly, once Morrison is out of earshot, "I don't like the smell of this. Railroad men don't usually make house calls to offer charity to hermits." Wade looks down at the scattered documents, each one potentially worth more than Morrison's entire offer. Whatever Cornelius Blackwood had been up to, it was important enough for powerful people to come sniffing around within hours of the discovery. "Sheriff," Wade says, "making a decision that will change everything. I think I'm going to need that time to consider." Quite a bit of time. Behind him, hidden among Blackwood's carefully organized secrets, A wall safe waits to be discovered, and with it, the first real clue about why a wealthy railroad tycoon would vanish into the night, leaving behind a fortune for a broken mountain man to find. The hidden wall safe reveals itself when Wade accidentally knocks over a filing cabinet while searching for more documents. Behind it, a section of the storage unit's back wall swings inward on concealed hinges, exposing a steel safe built into the warehouse's original brick foundation. Rebecca runs her fingers along the safe's edge with the wonder of someone discovering buried treasure. This must have been here when Blackwood rented the unit. He chose this specific space because of what was already hidden inside. The safe's combination lock stares at them like a one-eyed sentinel. Wade studies the brass dial, its numbers worn smooth by countless turns. Could be anything in there, he murmurs. Could be nothing. Only one way to find out, Rebecca says practically. Do you want to try some obvious numbers? Birth dates, anniversaries, that sort of thing? Wade shakes his head. I don't know enough about Blackwood to guess. But maybe, he pauses, remembering something from the documents they'd already examined. Hand me that railroad survey from the Chicago crate. Rebecca retrieves the rolled papers, and Wade spreads them across the makeshift table. The survey maps show planned railroad routes throughout the Montana Territory, each line marked with precise measurements and dates. But it's the signature block that catches his attention. Surveyed under authority of C.E. Blackwood, authorized by Congressional Act 47-1889. Congressional Act 47-1889, Wade reads aloud. 471889. He approaches the safe and begins turning the dial, each click echoing in the confined space. The final number slides into place with a satisfying thunk, and the safe door swings open with surprising ease. Inside, illuminated by the morning light streaming through the storage unit's door, lies a collection that makes the previous discoveries seem modest by comparison. Stacks of railroad survey maps fill most of the safe's interior, but these aren't the official government documents they'd seen before. These are hand-drawn maps showing planned routes that don't match any existing railroad lines. Wade unfolds one carefully, and Rebecca gasps at what it reveals. This shows a complete railroad network connecting every major mining operation in 3 states, she says, tracing the planned routes with her finger. Look here. It bypasses all the existing lines owned by Northern Pacific and Union Pacific. Blackwood was planning his own railroad empire. Wade studies the maps with growing amazement. The planned network would have revolutionized transportation throughout the Mountain West, creating competition for the railroad monopolies that currently strangled commerce in the region. Small towns like Cedar Ridge would have thrived with multiple transportation options and fair shipping rates. This would have changed everything, he realizes. Every farmer, every rancher, every mining operation, they all would have benefited from real competition instead of being held hostage by railroad barons. Rebecca nods grimly. And the existing railroad companies would have lost millions, maybe billions. She picks up another document from the safe, a thick folder bound with red ribbon. What's this one? Wade unties the ribbon and opens the folder to reveal a collection of correspondence between Blackwood and various government officials. The letters make for disturbing reading. Senators and congressmen writing to thank Blackwood for his generous contributions to their campaigns. Government regulators promising to expedite railroad approvals in exchange for unstated considerations. Blackwood was documenting corruption, Rebecca says quietly. He was building a case against the entire system. The final item in the safe is a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Blackwood's precise handwriting. Wade opens it carefully, aware that he's holding something that powerful people would kill to possess. The journal entries tell the story of a man who'd grown disgusted with the corruption he'd once participated in. Blackwood had started as an honest railroad engineer, but success had drawn him into a world of bribes, intimidation, and political manipulation. The later entries show his growing determination to expose the system from within. Listen to this, Wade reads aloud. The railroad trusts have corrupted every level of government, from local sheriffs to federal senators. They fix prices, eliminate competition, and bleed the common people dry while enriching themselves beyond measure. I've been complicit in this evil, but I will not die complicit. The evidence I have gathered will serve as my penance. Rebecca leans closer as Wade continues reading. I have hidden copies of all documents in secure locations. Should anything happen to me, I pray that someone with integrity will continue the fight I began too late in life. The people deserve better than the tyranny of gold-plated robber barons. A shadow falls across the storage unit entrance. Wade looks up to see Harrison Webb standing in the doorway, his pale eyes taking in the scattered documents and open safe with undisguised avarice. "Well, well," Webb says smoothly. "Looks like our mountain hermit has stumbled onto quite a treasure trove. This is private property, Webb," Wade says, rising to his feet. "You got no business here." Webb steps into the unit uninvited, his gaze cataloguing every visible asset like a merchant appraising inventory. "Oh, but I think I do have business here. You see, I've been doing some research into Mr. Blackwood's financial affairs. Turns out he owed my bank quite a substantial sum when he disappeared. That was 15 years ago," Rebecca points out. "Any debts would have been settled by his estate, would they?" Webb produces a document from his jacket with theatrical flourish. This is a promissory note signed by Cornelius Blackwood, promising to repay a loan of $50,000 to Cedar Ridge Farmers Bank. The note specifies that in the event of default, all of Blackwood's assets in Cedar Ridge County would serve as collateral. Wade takes the document with growing suspicion. The paper looks old enough, and the signature appears genuine, but something about Webb's timing strikes him as convenient to the point of impossibility. "Funny how this note just happened to turn up now," Wade observes. Webb's smile is cold as winter wind. Banking records take time to organize properly, but now that they've been found, I'm afraid I'll need to take possession of these assets, pending resolution of the debt. "Like hell you will," Wade says quietly. "Now, Mr. Harlan, let's be reasonable. You can't possibly afford to fight this in court. I'm prepared to be generous. Keep whatever gold coins you've already pocketed, and we'll call it even." Rebecca steps forward, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "Mr. Webb, this is extortion. You can't simply appear with convenient paperwork and claim ownership of someone else's property." "I can if the law is on my side," Webb replies smoothly. "And I assure you it is." Wade looks around the storage unit at the scattered evidence of Blackwood's war against corruption. Here was a man who'd fought against exactly the kind of manipulation Webb was attempting. The irony isn't lost on him that Blackwood's own assets might now be stolen using the same corrupt tactics he'd tried to expose. "Tell you what, Webb," Wade says slowly, "you give me 24 hours to examine this note and consult with a lawyer. If it's legitimate, we'll discuss terms. If it's not," he lets the threat hang unfinished. Webb's confidence wavers slightly. "There's nothing to discuss. The debt is clear." "Then you won't mind waiting for proper verification," Rebecca adds, with the authority of someone who understands legal procedures. Webb looks between them, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he nods curtly. 24 hours, Mr. Harlan. But don't think about disappearing into those mountains with my property." After Webb leaves, Wade and Rebecca stand in silence among Blackwood's secrets. The railroad survey maps seem to whisper of possibilities that died with their creator, while the corruption files promise a fight that could destroy them both. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asks softly. Wade picks up Blackwood's journal and holds it like a sacred text. "I'm thinking a dead man just gave me a purpose I haven't had in 20 years. Wade and Rebecca spend the afternoon in Dr. Martinez's kitchen, spreading Blackwood's documents across the worn oak table where 3 generations of the Martinez family have made their most important decisions. The late afternoon sun slants through lace curtains, casting shadows across pages that could reshape the entire Mountain West. "This cipher system is more sophisticated than I expected," Rebecca says. adjusting her reading glasses as she studies Blackwood's encrypted business ledger. The leather-bound book contains columns of numbers and letters that follow no obvious pattern, but Rebecca's teacher's mind recognizes the underlying structure. He's using a substitution cipher based on railroad mileage markers. Wade watches her work with growing admiration. 20 years of isolation have made him forget how satisfying it is to share a difficult task with someone whose mind complements his own. Rebecca approaches problems like a scholar, methodical and thorough, while his rancher's instincts help him see the bigger picture. "Here," she says suddenly, pointing to a decoded entry. "Listen to this. JM, Mountain Pacific, 50,000, Senator Williams, Land Bill 347. Does that mean what I think it means?" $50,000 bribe to a senator, Wade confirms grimly. And if JM is James Morrison, then that railroad man who visited yesterday has been buying politicians for years. The pattern emerges as they decode more entries. Mountain Pacific Railroad has been systematically corrupting government officials at every level, from local county commissioners to federal senators. They've fixed land auctions, manipulated mineral rights, and eliminated competition through bribes and intimidation. Blackwood documented everything, Rebecca marvels. Names, amounts, specific legislation that was bought and paid for. This isn't just evidence of corruption. It's a complete map of how the system works. Dr. Martinez enters the kitchen carrying a pot of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who's spent 40 years patching up the victims of powerful men's greed. "How bad is it?" "Worse than we imagined," Wade replies. "Blackwood was planning to expose the entire network. That's why he disappeared, or why he was disappeared," Rebecca adds quietly. A knock at the front door interrupts their work. Dr. Martinez returns a moment later, followed by Sheriff Coleman, whose usually calm demeanor shows signs of strain. "Wade, we need to talk," Coleman says without preamble. "I just got a visit from some federal marshals asking questions about you and that storage unit." Wade's blood chills. Federal marshals, 3 of them, all wearing badges from the territorial government. Said they were investigating irregularities in Blackwood's estate and needed to examine any documents you might have found. Coleman pulls out a chair and sits heavily. "Problem is, I sent a telegram to the territorial capital, and they never heard of these particular marshals." Rebecca looks up from the cipher she's been working on. "Imposters." "That's my thinking." "Professional ones, too. Their badges looked real enough, and they knew enough about federal procedure to be convincing." Coleman accepts a cup of coffee from Dr. Martinez with grateful hands. But something felt wrong. Real marshals would have come with proper paperwork and advance notice. Wade digests this information while studying the documents spread across the table. "Morrison's moving faster than I expected. He must have called in favors as soon as he realized I wasn't going to sell." "There's more," Coleman continues reluctantly. "Harrison Webb's been making noise about declaring you mentally incompetent. Says a man who's lived alone in the mountains for 20 years can't be trusted with important financial decisions." The insult hits Wade like a physical blow. After 20 years of grief and isolation, he's finally found something worth fighting for, and now they want to declare him unfit to fight. "Can he do that?" Rebecca asks, her voice tight with anger. "In theory, yes," Dr. Martinez replies with clinical precision. "Mental competency hearings can be initiated by concerned parties if there's evidence of impaired judgment or dangerous behavior. Living like a hermit isn't exactly evidence of mental illness," Coleman points out. "It is if you can find the right judge," Wade says quietly. He's learning fast how corruption works. Powerful people don't break laws. They buy the people who make and enforce them. Rebecca reaches across the table and covers his weathered hand with her own. "We won't let that happen." The simple human contact sends warmth up Wade's arm and straight to his heart. It's been 20 years since another person touched him with kindness, and the sensation nearly overwhelms him. He looks into Rebecca's dark eyes and sees something he'd forgotten existed, someone willing to stand beside him against whatever comes. "I need to understand what we're really dealing with," Wade says, forcing himself to focus on the documents. Blackwood didn't hide all this just to expose some railroad corruption. There's something bigger here. They work through the evening, decoding entries and cross-referencing names with the correspondence files. As the picture becomes clearer, the scope of the conspiracy expands beyond anything Wade imagined. Mountain Pacific isn't just one corrupt railroad. It's the hub of a network that includes mining companies, banks, political machines, and government agencies. "Look at this," Rebecca says, holding up a decoded page. Blackwood was tracking something called the Western Development Trust. It's a consortium of Eastern investors who've been buying up land, mineral rights, and transportation networks throughout the territories. Wade studies the organizational chart Blackwood had carefully drawn. At the center sits a name that makes his blood run cold. Vanderbilt Morgan Syndicate, $200 million capitalization. $200 million, he repeats slowly. That's more money than some countries have. And they've been using it to buy the American West, Rebecca realizes. Not through honest business, but through corruption, intimidation, and fraud. Dr. Martinez looks over their shoulders at the evidence spread across her kitchen table. No wonder Blackwood disappeared. He was threatening the most powerful men in America. A new knock at the door makes everyone freeze. This time, the sound is harder, more insistent. The knock of someone who expects to be admitted rather than invited. Coleman draws his revolver and moves toward the front of the house. Through the lace curtains, they can see the silhouettes of multiple men on the front porch. "Dr. Martinez," comes a voice from outside. "We're federal marshals investigating a matter of territorial security. We need to speak with Wade Harlan." Wade looks at the documents scattered across the table, evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful men in America, evidence that men have already killed to protect. "Back door," Dr. Martinez whispers urgently. "Through the garden to the church. Father Mackenzie will hide you." But as Wade gathers the most crucial documents, he realizes he's reached a crossroads that will define the rest of his life. He can run, as he's been running for 20 years, or he can stand and fight for something bigger than himself. The front door shudders under heavy blows. Time is running out, and Wade Harlan must choose between the safety of solitude and the dangerous path of justice that Cornelius Blackwood died trying to walk. Wade makes his choice in the space between heartbeats. Instead of running toward the back door, he moves to the front window and peers through the curtains at the men gathered on Dr. Martinez's porch. 3 of them wear convincing federal marshal badges, but their stance and the way they carry their weapons mark them as hired guns rather than lawmen. "Sheriff," Wade says quietly, "how many real federal marshals you reckon would come calling at a doctor's house after dark without sending word ahead?" Coleman studies the men through the window and nods grimly. "None that I've ever met." The front door splinters inward under repeated blows. Wade steps into the hallway, Blackwood's most crucial documents tucked inside his coat, and faces the 3 intruders with the calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. "Evening, gentlemen," he says politely. "You seem to have confused, Doctor. Martinez is home with your own. The lead man, tall, scarred, with the dead eyes of someone who's killed for money, pushes past the broken door. Wade Harlan, you're under arrest for theft of federal property and conspiracy against the territorial government." "Funny thing about that," Sheriff Coleman says, stepping into view with his revolver drawn. "I contacted the Territorial Marshal's office this afternoon. They've never heard of you boys." The scarred man's hand moves toward his gun, but Coleman's voice stops him. "I wouldn't, friend. Doc Martinez's neighbors have a tendency to investigate loud noises, and some of them fought in the war. They don't take kindly to fake lawmen threatening their doctor." As if summoned by his words, lanterns begin appearing in windows throughout the neighborhood. Cedar Ridge might be a dying town, but its people still look after their own. The tension stretches until Rebecca steps forward, her teacher's authority cutting through the violence like a blade. "Gentlemen, you're trespassing on private property and threatening citizens of Cedar Ridge. I suggest you leave before this becomes more complicated than you can handle." The scarred man studies the growing number of curious neighbors, calculating odds and payoffs. Finally, he nods to his companions. "This isn't over, Harlan. You can't hide behind small-town sentiment forever." After they leave, Wade slumps against the wall, the adrenaline draining from his system. Dr. Martinez immediately begins examining him for signs of shock or injury, her medical instincts overriding everything else. "I'm fine, Doc," Wade protests, but his hands are shaking as he pulls Blackwood's documents from his coat. "You're not fine," Rebecca says firmly. "None of us are fine. We're in the middle of something that's already gotten one man killed, and it's only going to get worse." She's right, and Wade knows it. But as he looks around the room at these people who've chosen to stand with him, Dr. Martinez with her fierce compassion, Sheriff Coleman with his quiet integrity, Rebecca with her brilliant mind and brave heart, he feels something he hasn't experienced in 20 years. He feels like he belongs somewhere. "There's something I need to tell you," Wade says quietly. He reaches into his coat and pulls out the worn leather journal he's carried for 2 decades. "About Sarah. About why I really went to the mountains." Rebecca sits beside him on Dr. Martinez's old sofa, close enough that he can smell the lavender. Soap she uses. Feel the warmth of her presence anchoring him to the moment. "Sarah died in a fire while I was away helping a neighbor," Wade begins, his voice steady despite the pain. "But that's not the whole truth. She died because I was too proud to ask for help when our own place was struggling." The words come slowly, like water from a long dry well. He tells them about the drought year that nearly broke them, about the cattle they lost, about the creditors who came calling with threats and ultimatums. He explains how his pride made him take work farther and farther from home, leaving Sarah alone more often than any husband should. "The night she died, she was burning papers in the fireplace," Wade continues. "Bills we couldn't pay, notices from the bank, letters from men who wanted to take everything we'd built together. The fire caught the curtains, then the walls, and Sarah—" His voice breaks. Rebecca's hand finds his, fingers intertwining with the natural ease of 2 people who've found their match. "She was trying to protect you," she says softly. "She was trying to save our pride by destroying the evidence of our failure, and I let her die alone because I was too stubborn to admit we needed help." Wade looks around the room. 20 years I've been punishing myself for that pride. 20 years of thinking I didn't deserve to be around decent people. Dr. Martinez's voice carries the gentle authority of someone who's seen every kind of human suffering. "Wade, guilt is like gangrene. If you don't cut it out, it spreads until it kills everything healthy. Sarah wouldn't want you to waste your life in isolation," Rebecca adds. "She'd want you to use this chance to help other people avoid the kind of pride that destroys families." Wade pulls Sarah's wedding ring from the chain around his neck, studying the simple gold band in the lamplight. For 20 years, wearing it has been both comfort and torment, a reminder of love and a symbol of failure. Blackwood didn't choose me by accident, he realizes. He chose someone who'd lost everything to pride and corruption, someone who'd understand what's at stake when powerful men decide they can take whatever they want. Sheriff Coleman holsters his revolver and moves to the window, keeping watch for the return of Morrison's hired guns. "What do you want to do, Wade?" "We can try to get you out of town tonight, help you disappear again." Wade stands and walks to Dr. Martinez's mantelpiece, where photographs of 3 generations of her family smile down from silver frames. These are people who've chosen to build something together rather than tear each other down. People who understand that communities survive through mutual support rather than individual pride. He removes Sarah's ring from the chain and sets it gently on the mantelpiece beside the family photographs. The gesture feels like releasing a breath he's been holding for 20 years. "No more running," he says firmly. Blackwood spent years gathering evidence against these people. Sarah died because we were too proud to ask for help when corrupt men tried to destroy us. I won't let their sacrifices be meaningless. Rebecca rises and stands beside him, her reflection joining his in the mantelpiece mirror. "Then we fight together," Wade looks at her, this brilliant, brave woman who's chosen to stand with a broken hermit against forces that could destroy them all, and feels something he thought had died with Sarah. Not the desperate love of youth, but the deeper affection of two people who found purpose in each other's company. Together, he agrees. Outside, storm clouds gather over Cedar Ridge, and in the distance, the whistle of the evening train reminds them that their enemies command resources beyond imagination. But inside Dr. Martinez's kitchen, 4 people begin planning a war against corruption that will either restore justice to the Mountain West or get them all killed in the attempt. The fight for Blackwood's legacy is about to begin, and Wade Harlan has finally chosen his side. 3 days later, while Wade and Rebecca work by lamplight in the storage unit, decoding the last of Blackwood's encrypted files, Rebecca discovers something that changes everything they thought they knew about their inheritance. "Wade," she says quietly, her voice carrying a strange note that makes him look up from the railroad survey he's been studying. "You need to see this." She's found a hidden compartment in the back of Blackwood's largest filing cabinet, a space so cleverly concealed that they've missed it through days of careful searching. Inside lies a single document that makes Wade's hands tremble as he reads it. It's a will. Not the official document that had been filed with the territorial government, but a secret codicil dated just 3 months ago. Wade reads it twice before the words sink in, and when they do, his entire understanding of recent events crumbles like a house built on sand. "I, Cornelius Eugene Blackwood, being of sound mind and body," Wade reads aloud, "do hereby bequeath my entire estate and all associated documents to Wade Harlan of Cedar Ridge, Montana Territory, contingent upon his acquisition of Storage Unit 17 through the method herein described." Rebecca leans over his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck as she reads along. "Method herein described. What method?" Wade continues reading, his voice growing more amazed with each word. "The charity auction has been arranged through my agent Murphy Thomas, with specific instructions that Mr. Harlan be made aware of the opportunity. The community support for his bid has been encouraged through careful placement of information regarding his character and circumstances." "Murphy," Rebecca gasps. Murphy was working for Blackwood. But the revelation that shocks Wade silent comes in the final paragraph. "Mr. Harlan has been under my observation for 7 years, since his demonstration of integrity during the Henderson mine dispute of 1881. His character, his losses and his isolation make him the ideal candidate to continue the work I began. Should he accept this inheritance, he will find me waiting at the coordinates marked in Survey Map 47B, C.E. Blackwood. Written this 15th day of September 1888. Wade stares at the date. September 15th, 1888. 3 months ago. "He's alive," Rebecca whispers. Wade's mind reels as he processes the implications. Blackwood hadn't died 15 years ago. He'd staged his disappearance and spent the intervening years gathering evidence and watching potential successors. Wade's winning the storage unit wasn't luck or fate. It was the culmination of a 7-year recruitment process. "The Henderson mine dispute," Wade murmurs, remembering. It had been a small thing, really. The mine owner had tried to cheat his workers out of promised bonuses, and Wade had testified on the miners' behalf despite threats and offers of bribes. He'd never imagined anyone important was watching. Rebecca is already unrolling Survey Map 47B, spreading it across the floor of the storage unit. The map shows the mountain region north of Cedar Ridge, with a location marked by a small red X about 15 miles into the wilderness. "He's been living up there all this time," she realizes. "Watching the town, watching you, waiting for the right moment." A new voice cuts through their amazement like a blade through silk. "How touching." The hermit discovers he's not as forgotten as he thought. They spin around to find James Morrison standing in the storage unit entrance, flanked by the same 3 men who'd posed as federal marshals. But this time, Morrison isn't bothering with polite pretenses. This time he's holding a gun. "Mr. Morrison," Rebecca says, with admirable calm despite the deadly situation. "I didn't hear you arrive." "That was the point, my dear." Morrison steps into the unit, his expensive shoes crunching on scattered papers. "I've been watching this place for days, waiting for you to find exactly what you just found." Wade rises slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Blackwood's alive." "Oh yes, very much so. Cornelius Blackwood has been a thorn in our side for 15 years, gathering evidence, disrupting operations, encouraging federal investigations into perfectly legitimate business practices." Morrison's smile is cold as winter moonlight. "But now, thanks to your discovery, we finally know where to find him." Rebecca backs toward Wade, her mind clearly working through possibilities and finding none that end well. "You can't seriously think you can just take what we've found and walk away, can't I?" Morrison gestures with his gun toward the scattered documents. A homeless hermit and a small-town schoolteacher against the resources of the most powerful business consortium in America? "I rather like our chances." Wade studies Morrison and his men, noting their positions, their weapons, their confidence. These aren't desperate criminals. They're professionals executing a carefully planned operation. But 20 years of mountain living have taught Wade things about survival that men like Morrison never learn. "You're making a mistake," Wade says quietly. Morrison laughs. "Am I? Please enlighten me. You think this is about money and power. But you're wrong." Wade gestures toward Blackwood's documents. "This is about justice, and justice has a way of finding people who think they're above it." "Justice?" Morrison's amusement grows. "Mr. Harlan, justice is what rich men call it when they win. Everything else is just crime that hasn't been prosecuted yet." One of Morrison's men steps forward, the scarred gunman from the earlier confrontation. "Boss, we should move. The longer we stay here, the more chance someone sees us." But Morrison seems to be enjoying himself too much to hurry. "You know what I find fascinating about this situation? Blackwood chose you specifically because he thought your suffering made you incorruptible. But every man has a price, Mr. Harlan, even hermits who think they're above earthly concerns." He reaches into his jacket and produces a photograph that makes Wade's blood freeze. It's Rebecca, taken with a telescopic lens, walking from her school to her mother's house just this morning. "Miss Martinez is quite lovely," Morrison continues conversationally. "It would be tragic if something happened to her because of your misguided sense of heroism. The threat hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre." Wade feels 20 years of careful emotional control beginning to crack under the pressure of rage and protective instinct. "Touch her and I'll kill you," he says, with the calm certainty of a man stating simple. Morrison's eyebrows rise in mock surprise. My, the hermit has teeth after all." He tucks the photograph back into his jacket. "But threats won't change mathematics, Mr. Harlan. We have superior numbers, superior resources, and superior motivation. You have sentiment and good intentions." Rebecca steps closer to Wade, her hand finding his arm in a gesture of support that gives him strength. "You're wrong about one thing, Mr. Morrison." "Oh? What's that?" "You don't have superior motivation." Her voice carries the quiet authority of someone who spent years teaching children to stand up to bullies. "You're fighting for money. We're fighting for everything that matters." Morrison's smile fades slightly. How philosophical. Unfortunately, philosophy doesn't stop bullets, but before he can continue, a new sound cuts through the evening air, the distinctive whistle of a steam locomotive approaching Cedar Ridge. Morrison and his men instinctively turn toward the sound, and Wade recognizes his moment. Years of mountain survival have taught him that opportunity comes in heartbeats, not minutes. As Morrison's attention wavers, Wade grabs Rebecca's hand and dives toward the back of the storage unit, pulling her behind the cover of Blackwood's heaviest filing cabinet. Gunshots explode through the confined space, bullets sparking off metal and splintering wood. But Wade and Rebecca are already moving, scrambling toward the secret panel that conceals Blackwood's hidden safe. "The map!" Rebecca gasps, clutching Survey Map 47B to her chest. "We need to reach Blackwood. Wade kicks open the concealed panel and pushes Rebecca through the opening into the warehouse's original brick foundation. Behind them, Morrison's voice roars orders to his men, but the sound is muffled by tons of brick and mortar there. In a maintenance tunnel that runs beneath the warehouse district, a relic from Cedar Ridge's more prosperous days when the railroad company maintained extensive underground infrastructure. Wade has explored these tunnels during his occasional visits to town, never imagining they might save his life. Where does this lead? Rebecca asks as they stumble through the darkness. Murphy's store, Wade replies, guiding her by touch along the familiar passage. And from there, we can reach the mountains. Behind them, they can hear Morrison's men breaking through the storage unit, searching for the tunnel entrance. They have minutes at most before the pursuit begins in earnest. As they emerge through a hidden door in Murphy's basement, Wade realizes that everything has changed. He's no longer just a hermit who stumbled onto a fortune. He's the chosen successor to a man who spent 15 years fighting the most powerful conspiracy in America. And now that fight has become a race to reach Cornelius. Blackwood before Morrison's guns silence, the only witness who can bring down an empire built on corruption and blood. Murphy's basement smells of potatoes and lamp oil, familiar scents that ground Wade in the reality of their desperate situation. Above them, they can hear Morrison's men spreading through the warehouse district, their voices carrying the methodical patience of professional hunters. "Thomas," Wade calls softly as they climb the basement stairs. "Thomas, we need help." Murphy appears at the top of the stairs, his weathered face grim with knowledge of what's coming. In his hands he carries a rifle that's seen better days, but still looks deadly enough for the work ahead. "Figured you'd be coming this way," Murphy says quietly. "Morrison's boys are thick as fleas out there. Got the whole district surrounded." Rebecca clutches Survey Map 47B against her chest, the paper that holds their only hope of reaching Blackwood alive. "How long have you been working for him?" 15 years. Ever since he helped my boy Tommy get into that engineering school back east." Murphy's voice carries the weight of old debts and older loyalties. "Cornelius Blackwood saved my family when the railroad barons tried to crush every small business in 3 counties. Been waiting ever since for the chance to return the favor." Wade peers through Murphy's front window at the street beyond. Morrison has positioned his men with military precision, one at each end of Main Street, 2 more covering the alleys, and the rest conducting a systematic search of every building. They're not just hunting fugitives anymore. They're preparing for war. "There's a dozen of them out there," Wade observes. "How many did Morrison bring to town?" 20, maybe 25, Murphy replies. "Rest are watching the mountain roads, making sure nobody gets word out to the territorial marshal." He hands Wade a leather satchel heavy with supplies. "Food, ammunition, and some things Cornelius wanted you to have if this day ever came." Wade opens the satchel to find provisions for several days. Boxes of rifle cartridges and a leather folder marked with Blackwood's precise handwriting. For Wade Harlan, the complete evidence. Inside the folder are documents that make everything they've found so far look like children's games. Financial records showing the Vanderbilt Morgan Syndicate's complete control over territorial politics. Correspondence proving that 3 sitting senators are on the syndicate's payroll. Most damning of all, a detailed plan for the systematic elimination of anyone who threatens their monopoly. "My God," Rebecca whispers, reading over Wade's shoulder. "They're not just stealing land and corrupting officials. They're planning to murder every honest politician and businessman between here and the Pacific." The list of names makes Wade's blood run cold. Federal judges, territorial governors, newspaper editors, even military officers who've shown insufficient enthusiasm for the syndicate's expansion. All marked for retirement with the same clinical precision Morrison had shown when threatening Rebecca. Blackwood's been gathering this evidence for 15 years, Murphy explains. But he needed someone clean to carry it forward, someone they couldn't buy or intimidate. He looks at Wade with something approaching reverence. Someone who's already lost everything they could threaten to take away. A commotion outside draws their attention back to the street. Morrison has gathered his men in front of the storage unit, their voices carrying clearly in the evening air. They found the tunnel, Rebecca says, watching through the curtains as Morrison's scarred lieutenant emerges from the underground passage. Morrison himself appears moments later, his expensive suit now dusty and torn, his cultured demeanor replaced by the cold fury of a predator whose prey has escaped. He barks orders to his men with military efficiency, spreading them in a wider net to cover every possible escape route. He's not just angry, Wade realizes. He's scared. If we reach Blackwood with this evidence, his entire operation collapses. Murphy nods grimly. Cornelius has been preparing for this moment since the day he disappeared. Got himself a fortress up in those mountains, communications equipment, enough supplies to withstand a siege. He pauses, studying Wade's face in the lamplight. Question is, are you ready to become the man he thinks you are? Wade looks at the evidence spread across Murphy's counter, proof of corruption that reaches to the highest levels of government, plans for murder and theft on an unprecedented scale, the complete blueprint for buying and controlling the American West. Then he looks at Rebecca, whose intelligent eyes reflect both fear and determination. I've been running from responsibility for 20 years, Wade says quietly. First from grief, then from guilt, finally from life itself. But Blackwood's right. Losing everything means I'm the only one who can't be bought or threatened into silence. Rebecca reaches across the counter and takes his hand, her fingers warm and steady against his scarred palm. We can't do this alone. Even if we reach Blackwood, Morrison has too many men, too much power. Maybe, Murphy says with a sly smile. But Cornelius Blackwood didn't spend 15 years just gathering evidence. He spent those years building a network, as if summoned by his words. The back door opens to admit Sheriff Coleman, followed by Dr. Martinez and half a dozen men Wade recognizes as the core of Cedar Ridge's surviving business community. They're armed and grim-faced, citizens who've decided that some fights are worth having regardless of the odds. Figured you could use some help, Coleman says simply. Morrison made a mistake when he brought hired guns into our town and started threatening our people. Dr. Martinez moves to Rebecca's side, her medical bag in one hand and a small but deadly derringer in the other. Some of us remember what it was like before the railroad monopolies, when a man could make an honest living without paying tribute to distant masters. Wade feels something stirring in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something stronger. The recognition that he's not alone in this fight, that decent people still exist who will stand against corruption even when it's dangerous to do so. Morrison's men have us outnumbered, he points out. Maybe in town, Coleman replies. But these mountains have been our home for generations. We know every trail, every cave, every place a man can make a stand. He hefts his rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who's used it to feed his family for decades. Let's see how Morrison's city boys do when the fight moves to our territory. Murphy spreads Survey Map 47B across his counter, and the group gathers around to plan their approach to Blackwood's mountain stronghold. The coordinates mark a location in the high country, accessible only by narrow trails that wind through terrain perfect for ambushes and defensive positions. There's an old mining road that gets us most of the way, Coleman explains, tracing the route with his finger. But the last 5 miles are on foot through country that'll break a horse's legs and a city man's spirit. Wade studies the map, his mountain experience translating the topographical lines into mental images of steep climbs, treacherous passages, and natural fortifications. Morrison's men will follow us. They have to. They can't let us reach Blackwood. Let them come, Murphy says grimly. Every step deeper into those mountains favors us over them. Dr. Martinez checks her medical supplies with professional efficiency. How many wounded should I prepare to treat? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Everyone in the room understands that they're preparing for a battle that will leave some of them dead and others changed forever. But Wade sees in their faces the same determination he's feeling, the recognition that some things are worth dying for, as many as it takes. Wade replies quietly. Blackwood has evidence that can restore honest government to half the American West. Morrison represents forces that would turn our entire country into a feudal estate owned by a handful of Eastern millionaires. Rebecca squeezes his hand tighter. Then we'd better make sure the right side wins. Outside, Morrison's voice can be heard organizing the search, spreading his men through Cedar Ridge like a disease looking for healthy tissue to corrupt. But inside Murphy's store, a different kind of organization is taking place. The gathering of ordinary people who've decided that extraordinary times require extraordinary courage. Wade looks around the room at these allies fate has given him, and for the first time in 20 years, he feels like he's exactly where he belongs. Not hiding from the world, but standing at the center of the fight for its soul. The race to reach Cornelius Blackwood is about to begin, and with it, the battle that will determine whether justice or corruption rules the Mountain West. Wade Harlan, the broken hermit who lost everything to pride and grief, is finally ready to discover what kind of man emerges when there's nothing left to lose but the fight itself. Dawn breaks gray and cold over the mountains as Wade leads their small group up the mining road toward Blackwood's hidden fortress. Behind them, Morrison's pursuit follows like wolves tracking wounded deer, their city boots struggling with the rocky terrain that Wade navigates by instinct. The mining road climbs steadily through pine forests, still heavy with morning mist, each switchback revealing more of the vast wilderness that has been Wade's home for 20 years. Rebecca walks beside him, her teacher's sensible shoes replaced with borrowed boots, her determination unwavering despite the punishing pace. "How much farther?" she asks, her breath forming small clouds in the mountain air. Wade checks the survey map against the landmarks ahead. 5 miles to where the road ends. Then we climb. He points toward a ridge barely visible through the trees. Blackwood chose his spot well, only one way up, and it's steep enough to kill a man who doesn't know mountains. Behind them, Sheriff Coleman maintains the rear guard with Murphy and 2 other townsmen, their rifles ready for the pursuit they know is coming. Dr. Martinez has insisted on accompanying them, despite protests about the danger, carrying medical supplies and the stubborn determination of someone who's spent a lifetime patching up the consequences of other people's violence. The first gunshot echoes through the forest like thunder, followed immediately by Coleman's voice calling a warning. Morrison's advanced scouts have found their trail, moving faster than Wade had hoped through terrain that should have slowed them considerably. They brought mountain men, Murphy realizes, studying the pursuit through a pair of field glasses. "See that big fellow in the lead? That's Jake Morrison, James Morrison's cousin, and he knows these hills near as well as we do." Wade feels his stomach clench. Jake Morrison is a legend in the territory, a tracker and hunter who's guided railroad surveys through the most treacherous country in the Mountain West. If Morrison has hired his own cousin, then the railroad syndicate is sparing no expense to silence Blackwood permanently. How long until they catch us? Rebecca asks. Wade calculates distances, terrain, and the relative fitness of their 2 groups. "An hour, maybe less. We need to reach Blackwood's telegraph before they cut us off." They abandon the mining road, where it peters out into a goat trail, beginning the steep climb toward the coordinates marked on Blackwood's map. The terrain grows increasingly treacherous, loose shale that shifts underfoot and drop-offs that plunge hundreds of feet into rocky chasms. Rebecca stumbles on the narrow trail, and Wade catches her arm before she can fall. For a moment, they stand pressed together on the mountainside, and he can feel her heart beating against his chest like a caged bird. "I'm scared," she admits quietly. "Good," Wade replies. "Fear keeps you alive in country like this." The sound of pursuit grows closer, Jake Morrison's voice echoing off the canyon walls as he drives his men upward with the relentless pressure of someone who understands that failure means death. Morrison's syndicate doesn't tolerate incompetence, and Jake knows that returning empty-handed would be signing his own execution warrant. Wade pushes the pace harder, drawing on 20 years of mountain experience to find routes that city men would consider impossible. But even his knowledge has limits, and when they round a bend in the trail to find it blocked by a recent rockslide, he feels the cold touch of despair. Dead end, Murphy pants, studying the wall of loose rock that bars their way. Take half a day to clear that, and Morrison's boys would be on us long before then. Wade examines the rockslide with the careful attention of someone whose life depends on understanding mountain hazards. The fall is recent, probably triggered by the spring thaw, and the rocks haven't had time to settle into stable positions. There's another way, he says quietly, but it's dangerous. He points toward a narrow ledge that skirts the edge of the slide, following the cliff face around the obstruction. The ledge looks barely wide enough for a single person, with loose rock above and empty air below. We'd have to go one at a time, Wade explains. And if the rock gives way, we die, Rebecca finishes for him. But if we stay here, Morrison kills us anyway. The sound of approaching boots makes the decision for them. Wade secures the evidence folder inside his coat and starts across the ledge, testing each step before committing his full weight. The rock holds, barely, and he signals for Rebecca to follow. One by one, they edge across the cliff face while gunshots echo behind them as Morrison's men reach the blockage. Wade can hear Jake Morrison cursing as he realizes what his quarry has attempted. Can picture the tracker weighing the risks of following them across terrain that would challenge an experienced mountaineer. Rebecca makes it across. Then Dr. Martinez, with her medical bag clutched to her chest like a talisman. Murphy follows, his storekeeper's bulk making the ledge creak ominously, but the old rock holds. Sheriff Coleman brings up the rear, his rifle ready to discourage pursuit. As he reaches the far side of the ledge, the sound of Blackwood's telegraph key echoes from somewhere ahead, rapid, urgent tapping that carries a message Wade can't decode, but understands perfectly. Cornelius Blackwood knows they're coming, and he's already begun transmitting the evidence that will bring down the most powerful conspiracy in American history. The race to save justice itself has entered its final phase. The telegraph key falls, silent as Wade and his companions reach a hidden plateau carved into the mountainside. Before them stands a cabin that seems to grow from the rock itself, so perfectly camouflaged that Wade nearly walks past it despite knowing the coordinates. Cornelius Blackwood emerges from the cabin's doorway like a ghost stepping into sunlight. 15 years of mountain living have aged him into something elemental, beard white as snow, eyes sharp as winter stars. But his hands steady as he operates the telegraph key that connects to stations in Denver, San Francisco, and Washington. "Mr. Harlan," Blackwood says with the calm satisfaction of a man whose long-laid plans are finally bearing fruit. "You're precisely on time." Wade stares at the man who's orchestrated the last week of his life with chess master precision. Blackwood looks exactly like what he is. A wealthy man who's chosen to live like a hermit for 15 years, sacrificing comfort for the chance to expose the corruption eating at America's heart. The evidence is transmitting to federal marshals and newspaper editors simultaneously, Blackwood continues, gesturing toward the telegraph setup that dominates one corner of his cabin. "By tonight, every honest lawman between here and Washington will know the complete scope of the syndicate's crimes." Rebecca moves to the window, keeping watch for Morrison's pursuit. "How long until the transmission is complete?" 20 minutes for the complete files. "But Morrison's people will try to cut the telegraph lines before then." Blackwood's weathered face shows grim satisfaction. "That's why I needed someone like you, Mr. Harlan, someone who could fight a holding action while justice finds its voice." The sound of gunfire echoes from the trail below, followed by Jake Morrison's voice shouting orders to his men. They found a way around the rock slide, and they're climbing fast with the desperate energy of men who know their own lives depend on silencing Blackwood permanently. Wade checks his rifle, his father's old Winchester, carried through 20 years of mountain solitude and finally called to the purpose it was made for. "How many routes up to this plateau?" "3, Blackwood replies, pointing to positions around the cabin. "The main trail you came up, a goat path from the east, and a chimney climb from the north that only an expert Mountaineer could manage. Sheriff Coleman positions himself to cover the main trail, while Murphy and the other townsmen spread out to watch the alternate approaches. Dr. Martinez sets up her medical station in the cabin's back room, where she can treat wounds while staying protected from gunfire. Mr. Blackwood, Rebecca says urgently, "There's something you need to know about James Morrison. He's not just corrupt, he's completely ruthless. He threatened to kill me to force Wade's compliance." Blackwood's expression darkens. The syndicate has moved beyond mere corruption into outright terrorism. All the more reason this evidence must reach honest authorities. The telegraph key continues its urgent tapping, each signal carrying another piece of the massive corruption puzzle to officials who can act on it. But Wade can see Morrison's men approaching through the trees below, their rifles glinting in the afternoon sun as they prepare for the final assault. Jake Morrison appears at the head of the trail, his mountain man's instincts reading the defensive positions with professional assessment. He signals his men to spread out, preparing for a coordinated attack that will overwhelm the cabin's defenders through superior numbers and firepower. "Wade," Rebecca says quietly, moving to his side at the window. "Whatever happens up here, I want you to know—" "Don't," Wade interrupts gently. "We're going to survive this. Both of us." But even as he speaks, Wade can see the mathematics of the situation. Morrison has brought at least 15 men, all armed and desperate. Blackwood's plateau offers good defensive positions, but they're outnumbered 3-1 against professional gunmen who understand that retreat means death. The first shots shatter the mountain silence as Morrison's men begin their assault. Wade returns fire with the steady accuracy of someone who's hunted for survival, each bullet precisely placed to make their limited ammunition count. Beside him, Sheriff Coleman's rifle speaks with the authority of a lawman defending his jurisdiction against invasion. From the east approach, Murphy's voice calls out a warning as more attackers appear, forcing the defenders to split their attention between multiple threats. The battle for Blackwood's evidence cache has begun in earnest, with the future of honest government hanging in the balance. Inside the cabin, the telegraph key maintains its urgent rhythm, transmitting proof of corruption to every corner of the country. Each dot and dash represents another nail in the syndicate's coffin, but only if the defenders can hold their positions long enough for the message to reach its destinations. Wade fires again, watching one of Morrison's men stumble and fall behind cover. Beside him, Rebecca reloads his rifle, with the quick efficiency of someone who's learned that survival requires everyone to contribute to the fight. The syndicate's hired guns press their attack with increasing desperation, knowing that every minute of delay brings them closer to exposure and prosecution. But on the mountain plateau where Cornelius Blackwood has made his final stand, the defenders fight with the quiet determination of people who understand that some battles define the character of nations. The climax of 20 years of hidden warfare has arrived, and Wade Harlan stands ready to discover whether justice or corruption will rule the American West. 6 months later, Wade stands on the porch of the new Cedar Ridge Community Center, watching children play in the autumn sunshine while their parents discuss plans for the town's revival. The building behind him represents everything Blackwood's fortune was meant to accomplish, not personal enrichment, but community empowerment. The telegram in his hand brings news from Washington that still seems impossible to believe. James Morrison and 17 members of the Vanderbilt Morgan Syndicate have been convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. 3 senators have resigned in disgrace. The railroad monopolies that strangled commerce throughout the mountain West have been broken up by federal antitrust action. Rebecca emerges from the community center carrying lesson plans for the adult education classes she's started for minors and ranchers who never had the chance to learn proper reading and writing. Her engagement ring, a simple band carved from Blackwood's gold, catches the afternoon light as she moves to stand beside him. The telegraph from Denver finally came through, Wade says, showing her the message. Harrison Webb's been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for document fraud and extortion. Rebecca smiles with quiet satisfaction. Good. Maybe honest bankers can finally establish themselves here without competing against corruption. The promissory note Webb had produced turned out to be a forgery, created after Morrison learned about the storage unit auction. The real Cornelius Blackwood had never borrowed money from Webb's bank, never pledged his assets as collateral. But proving the forgery had required months of legal proceedings and testimony from handwriting experts brought in from Chicago. Wade looks across the valley toward the mountain plateau where Blackwood had made his final stand. The old railroad tycoon had died 2 hours after the telegraph transmission completed, his heart giving out from the strain of 15 years spent fighting forces that most men wouldn't dare to challenge. But he'd lived long enough to see his evidence reach honest authorities, long enough to know that his sacrifice would restore justice to the territories he'd grown to love. "I still think about him sometimes," Wade admits. "Wonder if he knew how it would end." "I think he knew exactly how it would end," Rebecca replies gently. "He chose you because he recognized someone who'd lost enough to understand what really matters." The sound of hammering draws their attention to the construction site across the street, where Murphy is overseeing the building of a new general store. The old one had been damaged during Morrison's final assault on the town, when Jake Morrison had led a desperate attack while his cousin fought his last battle in the mountains. But the community had rallied, contributing labor and materials to rebuild better than before. Sheriff Coleman approaches from the direction of the courthouse, his badge now bearing the additional authority of federal deputy marshal, a position offered after his role in exposing the syndicate's crimes became known in Washington. He's been traveling throughout the territory, helping honest lawmen clean out the corruption that had infected every level of government. "Wade, got another telegram for you," Coleman says, holding out an official-looking document. "This one's from the governor's office." Wade reads the message twice before its contents fully register. The territorial government is offering him appointment as Commissioner of Railroad Affairs, with authority to oversee the implementation of new transportation regulations designed to prevent future monopolistic practices. "They want me to move to the territorial capital," Wade says wonderingly. "Oversee the transition to competitive railroad practices." Rebecca reads over his shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "It's important work, the kind of work Blackwood would want to see continued." Wade considers the offer, weighing responsibility against the peace he's found in Cedar Ridge. For 20 years, he'd hidden from the world's problems. For the past 6 months, he'd been learning to engage with them again. But this appointment would mean leaving the community he's helped to rebuild, abandoning the life he's begun to build with Rebecca. "What do you think?" he asks her. "I think," Rebecca says slowly, "that Blackwood didn't save this evidence just to fix one county in Montana. He gathered it to reform the entire system." She pauses, studying his face in the fading light. "But I also think you've already done your part. You don't owe the world your entire life." Wade looks around Cedar Ridge, at the new buildings rising from the ashes of corruption, at the families who've returned now that honest business is possible again, at the children who'll grow up in a community where merit matters more than political connections. This is what Blackwood's fortune was meant to create. Not monuments to wealth, but opportunities for ordinary people to build extraordinary lives through honest work and mutual cooperation. "I'm going to decline the appointment," Wade decides. "Let someone younger take on that fight. I've got different work to do here." Rebecca's smile lights up her entire face. "What kind of work?" Wade reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small velvet box, his movements steady despite the magnitude of the moment. For 20 years, he'd carried Sarah's ring as a symbol of loss. Now he carries a different symbol, a promise of new beginnings built on the foundation of lessons learned through suffering. "The kind of work that requires a permanent partner," he says, dropping to one knee on the porch of the community center that represents their shared vision for the future. Rebecca's yes comes through tears of joy that wash away the last shadows of the grief that had defined Wade's life for 2 decades. As the sun sets over Cedar Ridge, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Wade Harlan finally understands what Cornelius Blackwood had tried to teach him. True wealth isn't measured in gold or land or power over others. True wealth is found in the connections we build with each other, the communities we strengthen through shared sacrifice, and the love we're brave enough to accept when life offers us a second chance. The broken hermit who'd lost everything to pride and isolation has become a man who understands that having everything means knowing what truly matters. And what matters most is standing beside him on this porch, wearing his ring, ready to build a future worthy of the past they've both survived. Some stories end with heroes riding into the sunset. This one ends with a hero choosing to stay home, having finally learned that the greatest adventures happen when we stop running from life and start embracing all the messy, beautiful, complicated joy it has to offer.